everyone, this is Steve Rosenberg with Mynd Property Management. I'm joined today with Giles Imrie, who is our head legal counsel here at Mynd. Giles, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Steve. Glad to be here.
So, Giles, Bill 1482, which is statewide rent control, basically came into effect January 1, and there was a lot of information leading up to it. And I know we did a video on this prior, a lot of comments and concern. Now it's past January 1, and I just want to see if we can get an update from you, and maybe you can re-explain to people what 1482 is, the bill, as well as what have you seen since then, if anything, on this bill?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, like you said, we did several videos on this, sort of talking about the actual implications and the requirements of it, but it's twofold, right? You've got the new rent cap, which is a statewide rent cap of 5%. Plus the CPI index growth for your particular region, or 10%, whichever is, if it can't go over 10%, even if the CPI. But right now you're probably looking at somewhere around between 7 and 8% with the various CPI indexes. So that is the maximum you can increase your rent annually. There are a couple of exemptions in place for single family homes, condos, and a number of other things that we've described in that in prior material. And then there's the just cause ordinance is the second piece of that, which just means that you can no longer unilaterally terminate a lease at the end of the term unless the tenant is otherwise in material breach of the lease, and the statute sets forth all the various sort of categories of what's considered a material breach. They're all the normal things, non-payment of rent and material damage, things like that. But it just means that a tenant now has the option, if they are otherwise in compliance with the lease, paying their rent on time, to stay as long as they want, unless you're doing something like an owner move-in or one of the various carve-outs that allow you to, as a property owner, to terminate the lease even with the just cause ordinance. So now that it's in effect, there's a couple of things coming up. I think it's July 1 of 2020 is when the requirement kicks in. There's 3 different disclosures that now you need to build into your lease documentation if you want to take advantage of the various exemptions, or if the property is even subject to rent control, there's a disclosure you now have to put into your lease as of July 1, 2020. Before July 1, you're required to give this information to your tenants, but as of July 1, it actually has to be in your lease material. So, probably, the initial one is just if your property is subject to the rent cap, which means it's not a single family home, it's not a condo or a townhouse, it's not owned by a corporation or an LLC that's owned by a corporation or a real estate investment trust. And then you've got to put in the specific statutory language advising the tenants of what the civil code sections are that allow them the protections under the rent cap and the just cause ordinance. The other 2 disclosures are really important. For example, there's an owner move-in exception in the just cause ordinance. So if you or a family member, described family member, want to move back into your home, you're allowed to terminate the lease. The catch is you've got to add this language into your lease as of July 1 that specifically gives you the right to do that. So just failing to update your lease documentation, have that correct language, even though you're otherwise afforded the right to do that, you lose that opportunity if you don't include that disclosure language.
So, real quick. So does that mean that everybody has to basically rewrite their leases as of January 2nd, 2020? Is that, if you want to be in compliance?
July 1st, 2020. So
right. So after that, let's just say July 1st, you basically, you're going to, all these new leases have to be, if you want to be able to take advantage of some of these, you have to rewrite it, huh?
Yeah. Either include an addendum or into the body of the lease itself. So the first one is if your property is subject to rent control, then you just got to have that. You're required to have that disclosure language in there.
Right.
The other 2, if you want to take advantage of the exemptions that are built into the statute, you've got to build in that disclosure language as well. So it adds a level of complexity because you may have, especially if you're managing different kinds of properties. You've got an if this, then that scenario where if I've got this type of scenario, I need this disclosure language. If I have a property that is not exempt, I need this disclosure language. So you've got to have you've got to have flexibility in your lease documentation and ability to identify what type of property is and insert the appropriate disclosure language specific for these two bills or these two statutes.
Okay.
The other one I didn't mention was so if your property is exempt, if it's a single family home, duplex, or sorry, not a duplex, but a condo or a townhome, then you've got to add that specific disclosure language that says this property is exempt. And failing to do that just means it's no longer exempt is the implication of the statute. So very important.
And then on your next lease, you could include it and then it would be exempt again on a new lease or renewal?
Yeah, every lease after July 1, you've got to maintain that same statutory language.
Okay. Wow. And have you noticed, or has there been anything, I know it's fairly early, it's beginning of February. Have you heard of any implications of people and any fines or any issues with the new law that have been coming down since it is brand new?
So far, really the main implications are the law with the rent increase portion of the law was retroactive to March of 2019. So as of January 1, if a property owner had put in place a rent increase that exceeded the rent cap prior to January 1, you've got to go back and readjust that rent to get it in compliance with the rent cap. So it's early, but those are the issues that have popped up for property owners, is having to retroactively go back and adjust rent downward to comply with the rent cap if they were over it in the first place.
Would they have to adjust the rent, or would they actually have to write a check back to the resident? Do you know?
Well, it's only effective as of January 1. So you have to adjust the rent as of January 1. So
Gotcha.
So depending on when you're making the adjustment, it would be effective as of January 1.
Okay.
So they would have a credit if you hadn't done the adjustment yet.
Understood. Another question I have, I know in Seattle, or I don't know if it's the whole state of Washington or just Seattle, but there was a law when I was up there, they were talking about now that if people wanted to purchase a house to basically flip the property, they had to give the tenant, it was a certain amount of time. It may have been 90 to 120 days before they could actually have the resident move out of the property. Have you heard anything like that coming down to the California law statutes?
No, but I wouldn't be surprised. There's a lot of stuff in the works. A lot of stuff that dies in the legislature that we don't even see. But the tenant rights organization are constantly pushing for new legislation on all fronts in that regard. It's really a game of whack-a-mole, because all the unintended consequences that come with these various bills pop up something new that gets their attention.
Sure. Okay, great. Well, Giles, thank you so much. That's good to know. And for those of you that want to know more about 1482, we have a lot of video content, education that you can learn. If you go to our website, it's mind.co. So it's MYND.co. And if you go in the Knowledge Center, you're going to find a lot of information, both local as well as regional and national information that would be good for you to know. To stay educated, we're going to constantly be updating information, especially as these laws evolve. So make sure you check back regularly, watch the videos. And again, if you have any questions, you can reach out to any of us. We'd be happy to help you. Again, this is Steve Rosenberg with Giles Imrie at Mind. And thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.